in your current job right now, in your current role, in your family, in maybe a nonprofit you're involved in, what's one thing that you could ask a little bit better question? And what's one area I could ask a better question in that area? And just spend the next couple of days jotting down, this is a better question, this is a better question, this is a better question, this is a great question. Einstein said this, I love that at the top. He said, if you gave me an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes figuring out what questions to ask, and then the last 5 answering them. He used a what-if question. He talked about when he figured out some of the relativity idea, he was actually sitting talking about math, and he was kind of bored with the discussion. And he starts looking at the clock. And he said, how do I know what time it is? And he said, well, that's simple. I see the light. Well, how do I see the light? That's simple. The light hits the clock, and it bounces off, hits my eyes. Huh. And then he asked a better question. He said, what if I were on one of those beams of light coming away from the clock, and I looked back at the clock, what would I see? If I was going away from the clock the same speed as the light, I would see the same light the whole time, wouldn't I? Time would freeze. And then he said, oh, wow, that's pretty neat. What if I was going faster, that beam of light? Then I would see time go backwards because I'd be catching up to light that left a little while ago. Wow. And then he said, what if? What if? Muhammad Yunus, one of the most creative people alive today. Right? He won the Nobel Prize in 2006. He's got a great question. He's got several, but one of them is this. How can we modify the world in such a way that poverty exists only in museums within the next 30 years? That's a pretty good question, isn't it? And then he says, I know there's ways to do this. He's creating a healthcare system for third world countries. He partnered with Adidas. He asked Adidas, he said, could you help me make a sneaker that the poorest people on the planet would actually buy? Because he says, I don't want to create a non-profit solution, and I don't want to create a for-profit solution. He wrote a book called Social Business. He wrote several books, but that's one of them. And he talks about, I want to create a solution that's completely scalable, that's very entrepreneurial, that pays for itself, but exists to support a cause, to change something, to make something better. So he says, Adidas, will you partner with me? Not your business, not mine. But will you partner with me with what you know about sneakers to help create a €1 pair of sneakers? Walt said, let's do it one more time. Let's do it one more time. I did it again. The people were starting to get tired. This is 1954. Walt says, how many of you know the song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic? The Glory, Glory, Hallelujah song. How many know that song? Everyone in the studio says, hey, yeah, we know it. He says, let's sing that right now. And he conducted them singing that song. He said, they played this song when the Lincoln train, after Lincoln was shot, when it went from station to station, town to town. It went to 440 towns with Lincoln's body, his funeral procession. And they played that song every single village it went into. And he had them all sing it. And at the end, they were all crying. And then he said, let's record it again. And Royal Dana recorded it again. That recording they still use in Disney around the world. He wanted a war-wearied Lincoln. He wanted the voice of someone who had walked Antietam, where 23,000 Americans lay dead, almost all in one little bloody lane. He wanted that voice. He wanted the voice of a Lincoln who went to Gettysburg. He wanted the voice of a Lincoln who got that letter that you all know from Private Ryan. This woman had lost 4 of her children already in the war. Can you send the 5th one home? He wanted that Lincoln. And he thought, I got this idea filed away. That song moved people emotionally. Maybe it'll help this actor get that. How well do you do with collecting ideas from everywhere? You see that little expression under there, quantity equals quality? Anyone not like that expression? I'm hoping that some of you don't. Can you imagine being in a surgery and the surgeon says, what should we do here? I don't know, let's try a lot of stuff. Quantity equals quality. Let's try this, and if that, we're flying in last night, we're landing the plane, and I'm thinking like the pilot of this plane, I hope he's not thinking quantity equals quality, right? How should we land? Should I go in this way or this way? Let's try them both. Quantity does not equal quality, but in the creative part, in the creative phase, it does. And let me explain that in this way. 1934, Walt Disney says, we're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to create the first ever full-feature cartoon movie. His brother says, Walt, one of the dumbest ideas you ever had. He says, we're going to do Snow White. 1934. Anyone? I mean, 64. 64 dwarf names they came up with. But it wasn't just 64 dwarf names. 64 dwarf names, and then the personalities for every single dwarf. And then they had sketches for what each one would look like. They had the voices picked out for 64 different dwarfs. He'll do that one. He'll do that. Oh, you know who we'll get? We'll have to get this person to do that voice. Then they did storylines of dwarf number 1, dwarf number 17, and dwarf number 35. And they'd do a story with those three. And then they'd say, you know what? 35 doesn't fit. 117 and 42 fit. Oh, that changes that little story. And they made little scenes and they filmed stuff. So if you had to come up with 7, me and you would probably come up with 10 or 15, most people. Some of us come up with 30. And then we'd narrow it down to 7, wouldn't we? When? We'd have a meeting on Friday. Yeah? Would you have a meeting on Friday? And you narrow it down to 7? And you might say, you know, we didn't narrow it down. All right, that's it. Everybody vote by Monday. We got to have this down to 7. 2 years. For 2 years, they worked with 64 dwarf names and traits. Now, you getting the idea why the budget went a little out? Anybody? Okay. 64 for 2 years. How many movies have you seen that came out in 1937? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Anybody? Anybody? Probably not another one. Gone with the Wind was the year, I think, right after. Probably just one that you saw that came out that year. Probably just one that you saw that came out that year. Creativity. I mean, there's the part of the price is up front, being willing to get more ideas than you're used to getting and let them live a little longer. Now, some people say, Jonathan, I can't do this at all, right? I can't do this at all, but let me ask you this.
My name is Julie Cooper. I attended a conference today, or actually yesterday, the Healthcare Financial Management Association, and was very intrigued and inspired by speaker yesterday, Jonathan Fanning, and he spoke about, you know, how can we stay creative and how